Hey, in this video, we're going to learn some gameplay programming by modifying the player character. And go ahead and open up the player character blueprint. When the blueprint editor opens, grab the tab and dock the window in the top bar. In Unreal Engine, every game object is an actor that is comprised out of multiple component objects. In the viewport, we can see the components that make up this actor, and the component list is on the left. The player character is made up of a capsule collider, a helpful arrow component, a mesh component, a camera component, and a character movement component. The player character class is a child of the character class, which is a child of the pawn class. In the component list, click on the player character. In the details panel, you can see the properties that are inherited from the character class and the pawn class. Click on the character movement component. In the details panel, you can see the properties that affect walking, jumping, crouching, and other kinds of movement. Let's try changing the player's speed. In the search box in the details panel, type in speed. Change the max walk speed from 600 to 300. Compile your class and run the game. The player now moves at half the speed. Alright, let's make 3 modifications to our character. First, let's give the player the ability to sprint. We need to add a new input mapping. Go to Settings, Project Settings. On the left, find the section called Input. Expand the action mappings and axis mappings. Here you can see how various keyboard, controller, and mouse buttons and axes are mapped onto gameplay actions and axes. Click the plus button to add a new action mapping. Call it Sprint, and from the drop-down list, look up the Shift button on the keyboard. We might as well add the input mapping for game controllers too. I'm going to go with the right trigger. Close the project settings, and there's no need to save. Back in the player character blueprint, go to the Event Graph tab. The event graph represents an event-driven environment as a flowchart. Every event is represented by a red node. The nodes have these white execution wires that dictate our code's flow control. To add sprinting, right-click and look up our new sprint input mapping. When the player presses sprint, we want to change our max walk speed. That value is in our character movement object, so let's drag out a reference to that object. This node is a variable. Pull a wire out of this variable and search for set max walk speed. When sprint is pressed, we should set the max walk speed to 600. Now select this node and duplicate it with Ctrl W. When sprint is released, set the maximum walk speed to 300. And now we have a great sprinting mechanic. Second, let's improve our platforming by increasing our character's air control. Select the character movement component and search for air control. By default, the player has 5% movement control while they are in the air. Let's increase this to 100% by changing the value to 1. Now, platforming should feel much easier. And finally, let's add a double jump. Select the player character and in the details panel search for jump. Set the jump max count to 2. And just like that, we've added double jumping. And the player movement is now really starting to come together.